that movement took on the color of religious law. It didn't start off as a movement for religious law. This is 1994. By 2009, that had gained traction in society, and coupled with it was a very strong sense of sort of social inequality and economic inequality in Swat. So by 2009, there were sort of some broad confusion in various segments of the population as to whether this is a class-based struggle against the landlords, whether this is a struggle of citizens against the state, or is this a struggle of the fundamentalists to get rid of government? There was a lot of overlap between these, and there was lack of clarity. That movement succeeded in putting pressure on the government to agree to the imposition of Sharia law. The minute Sharia law was introduced, literally within weeks, they saw that it was leading to the imposition of Sharia law over others who hadn't bought into the idea. So 3 weeks later, they realized they had backed the wrong horse. At that point, then, there was social pressure from within the country to get the army to act on it, right? And to sort of reverse the promises that they had made. So what was a partial deliberative process over a 15-year period, resulting from the failure of the state to meet the needs of its citizens, which they actually sanctified by law, had to be backtracked, and the army was brought. This is the only populist movement for the army to act against the citizens who were rising up against the state. And it was because a minority view was being imposed on the rest. So what was absent was the lack of alliances with other segments of the population which hadn't bought into that deliberative discourse. The third example I want to give is running in parallel, starting 2007, and these are my slides, was a movement for restoration of the judiciary. 2007, the general in power found that the judiciary, which he had put in place, having dismissed the sitting judiciary, was beginning to gain teeth of its own and was beginning to say, we're supposed to be independent. We should have the right to make our own decisions based on rule of law. So he dismissed the Chief Justice, and the lawyers went on strike, right? Now, the lawyers going on strike, you would say, why would the lawyers go on strike, and how effective would that be? But these kinds of images of lawyers actually being beaten up by the police got traction because it overlapped with other sentiments in society about media freedom, about the rights of citizens, about a call for a democratic process and letting go of the military general. And what you see here is, you can't read the J, but this is the word spelled out on the chest of these people is judicial, and it goes on to say judicial hanging, basically arguing that the judiciary is now being hanged by the state, whereas the judiciary is supposed to be the arbiter of justice rather than the sort of the subject of the state. And at this stage, this movement is a lawyers' movement. It then goes beyond that into action, which surprised everybody because lawyers are supposed to be the abiders of the law. And it then goes on into broad-based alliances where the lawyers reach out to the media, reach out to civil society, reach out to activists, and reach out to the other politicians who at the same time were struggling for restoration of civilian rule and parliamentary democracy, right? So what's my point over here, right? The real point is, I argue that there are 4 conditions which make deliberative processes gain traction. One is that the basic frame comes from outside. It does not come from the people themselves. So in this case, this was a government, in both the Swat case and in the case of the judicial movement, this was a government that was had gone from being an army sort of takeover to a government that was trying to gain legitimacy in the eyes of its citizens. Therefore, a gradual relaxation of media freedom, therefore a gradual, more openness about the talk of citizens' rights and social rights, and the media became free. The media went from 1 TV channel in 2001 to 92 TV channels in 2007, and that makes a difference. And there are huge debates within the media, most of them privately owned. Second, policy coherence. In the past, when changes have been introduced, they have been short-term, and they have not been consistent. So when unlike India, where PRI was introduced, when in Pakistan local government was introduced, the rest of the political process was subverted. So military regimes love local government. Politicians, elected politicians and parliamentarians see local government as undermining them. They still haven't reached out and built that alliance. So if you have internal messages that are contradictory, it undermines the deliberative process. Third, I can flip over, is sustainability. Backtracking is worse than not having a deliberative process. So policy inconsistency and policy reversals generate skepticism about the process of deliberation and about the legitimacy of the institutions which could protect the poor. And finally, my story here on alliance building. Right? If there are shared imperatives that force different segments of society to come together for their own interests, that is likely to get traction and likely to lead to change more than if one segment of the population believes this is in their interest. And that's what has weakened the women's movement. The women's movement is very strong, but it is a women's movement, and it is seen more as an urban women's movement, and it is not linked up to the other discourses and the other deliberations in society, and therefore it continues to be of interest, it continues to be strong, and it continues to be marginalized, right? And that's the trick over here. So this dynamic that we see in the judicial movement is one that combines media freedom, the restoration of democracy, citizens' grievances, to create the kind of coalition building that leads to a new dynamic. And that dynamic has therefore allowed it to be sustained over time. So when the judicial movement and media movement succeeded in removing the general, a civilian government came in, within 6 months, promptly fired the Chief Justice because he even challenged the elected government to say, no, you don't determine what judgments I make. We are now independent. And that elected civil government fired him. There was another movement, and that was this Long March, to say, no, the rules of the game have changed. It isn't that we didn't like that person, we didn't like that process, and we didn't like that institution. So those are the 4 conditions, I argue, to make deliberative processes get traction. Thank you very much.